Chapter 11. Next year, in the early summer, Olav put up a new barn and had it roofed by the time of bearing in the hay. He and his housefolk were busy haymaking in the meadows down by the mouth of the river. It was an afternoon a few days before Margaretmas, when a strange man came up to him among the haycocks, gave him greeting, and said, "I have a message for you, Olav, which is such that I may not tarry in the telling. Will you go with me a little apart so that we may speak, alone?" Olav did so, and when they came a little way from the others, the man said, "I come from Gunnarsby. Your daughter is in travail of childbirth and in great jeopardy. It were well if you could come to her, and that as swiftly as your swiftest horse can bring you." "Is it so," asked Olav, "that they think her life to be at stake?" "There is peril of it," replied the other. Olav ran back to the field, found Ragnar and Tor, and told them how matters stood. He bade Tor bring Brunsvein from the paddock, and Ragnar fetch food. Then he went down to the stranger and asked him to go with him to the house. As they went, Olav asked of a sudden, "But where is your horse, man?" "I have walked from Gunnarsby." "You have walked?" Olav looked at his guest suspiciously. He was a man in his 30s, looked like any other serving man. Olav could not call to mind having seen him before, but that was nothing to go by, since they had so many folk about them at Gunnarsby. The man had a trustworthy look. "Did Jorund send you hither with such a message, and gave you no horse?" "To tell you the truth, Olav, it was not the Repungs that sent me. But Cecilia helped me once when I was in bad straits, and then I vowed to God and St. Halvard I would repay her if it were ever in my power. I thought I had a chance to do so now, if it be given to her to see you and speak with you before she may die." Olav was somewhat easier in his mind, as he thought that perhaps his daughter was not in such a bad way after all, since it was neither her husband nor his brother's wives who had dispatched the messenger. There seemed to be something strange about the whole affair, but however it might be, he was glad to have been told of his daughter's sickness, and he would ride to Gunnarsby at once. He asked no more questions of the stranger. Finn was his name, but on arriving at the manor gave orders that he should be well housed and cared for, and when he had taken his rest, they were to lend him a horse for his homeward journey. An hour later Olav was in the saddle, and stretched Brunsvein to the utmost. This was the swiftest colt in his stable, but he did not usually ride him himself, as he was not so handsome to look at as Bay Roland, his own saddle-horse. On reaching Skeetus parish, he stayed for a few hours with his kinsfolk at Hestbake, and gave Brunsvein a rest. But Olav mounted again long before sunrise, and late in the day he came to Gunnarsby. But there he was told at once that Cecilia was doing well. She had given birth to a fine and healthy son. This was already a day and a half ago. No, Mistress Lucia replied to his questions. Cecilia had not had so hard a travail. She had been in no more peril of her life than any other young wife. Olav saw plainly that they were greatly surprised at his coming, and he was no more than moderately welcome at Gunnarsby this time. There was something behind this. He could not guess what, but so as not to betray this Finn, he replied, when Lucia asked him where he had heard of Cecilia's illness, that he had met some folk at church who had kindred in these parts. They had told him that his daughter, who was married at Gunnarsby last summer, might expect a child about the time of Margaretmas. "Yes, but it was not expected before Marymas." Mistress Lucia broke off in confusion, as though she had said too much, and there was an odd look on the faces of the others. Brynhild said the young wife had been sore afraid all the time she had been with child. Maybe she had talked of it, saying she was afraid of this too, that it might come before its time. It was strangely unlike Cecilia to be afraid, thought her father. But with women one can never know, and after all, a man was no judge of these things. He could only be glad that Cecilia was doing well, and since he was here, he was glad too that he would see his daughter again. It was fairly dark in the upper chamber where Cecilia lay, when Lucia took Olaf up to see her in the evening. It rejoiced Olaf to see that his daughter was glad he had come. She said that all was well with her now, and she was doing well in every way. The room in which they had laid her was spacious and richly furnished, and there was no lack of neighbours' wives and serving-maids to attend to her and her child. Jorunn spoke very lovingly to his wife, and seemed exceedingly proud that he too had a son. And the women loudly praised the child. Olaf took it in his arms when they handed it to him, looked at it. This was the little lad who would one day take his place at Hestviken, if God should suffer him to grow into a man. But he had always thought that newborn babes were ugly little monsters to look at, all except Cecilia. She had been fair from the first day of her life. Next morning Olaf sat with his daughter again. They talked for the most part of those they knew at home. It was very little Cecilia had to say as to how she liked her new home, only that there was far more bustle here than at Hestviken, and the folk of Gunnarsby were much abroad to feastings and the like. This had been a burden to her of late, but now, to be sure, she would stay more at home, as she had a child at the breast. "Yes," said her father, "but a little lad like this will grow quickly, and soon you will be free again." "It was not that I thought of," replied the young wife hastily. "I must take after you, father. I like best to live where there is no such crowd." Her last words struck her father as strangely scornful. He was about to correct the child, bid her enjoy her youth while she had it. At that moment one of the neighbours' wives came with the babe to lay it to its mother's breast. Cecilia wore only a little vest covering her bosom and arms. As the woman raised her upon the pillows, the father had a glimpse of her naked body about the waist, and he saw that her side was all black and blue. At the same time the sun shone in upon the bed. There were snatches of brightness between the clouds, and he noticed that her face also bore marks as of blows. "Have you hurt yourself?" her father asked after the strange woman had gone. "Yes, I fell and bruised myself," said Cecilia. "That is what made him come before his time." Olav thought it so far well that a mishap of this sort had caused it. He had been afraid she might have inherited her mother's infirmity, and no doubt it was this fall that had made her uneasy. "So it was you who thought of sending this Finn for me?" Cecilia was silent for a moment, as though reflecting. "I did not ask him to go, either. But perhaps he thought he owed me gratitude. And then, maybe, he took it into his head to repay me, when he heard I had fallen and hurt myself." "I wonder, though," said Olaf, "whether he be yet returned. Have you heard? He was to borrow a horse of ours, so I could take it back with me." "Finn will take good care that you have the horse back. But to tell the truth, father, I do not think we shall see him at Gunnarsby. They are stricter with their servants here than we are wont to be, and as Finn ran off without asking leave—" "Did he so?" Cecilia nodded. "I wish I knew," she said, "what he will do with himself now. He has been a trusty man to me." Perhaps you wish me to take him into my service at Hestviken? Olaf asked. Cecilia was silent for a moment, looking down at the child at her breast. "No, I don't wish that at all," she then said in her curt little voice. Next day the boy was baptized, and on the day after Olaf intended to return home. But in the evening, as he was about to bid his daughter good night, he chanced to be alone with her for a moment. Then he made up his mind to ask her. "Tell me now, Cecilia, while we are alone, have you anything on your mind that you would fain tell me?" "No, I have not," said the young wife firmly. Seeing that her father looked disappointed, she gave him her hand. "But for all that I am glad you came, father." On the morrow Olaf set out for home. He had left the parish itself behind him and was now riding uphill by the bank of a little stream, on both sides of which were small farmsteads in the midst of green meadows. He was deep in thought when his horse gave a sudden start. A man had risen abruptly from beneath some bushes at the edge of the bridle path. It was that man Finn. They exchanged greetings, but as the man said nothing, Olaf thought he must. "It turned out not so ill as you foretold, my friend," he said kindly. "My daughter is now in good case, and yesterday we christened Kolbein Jorun's son." "Yes, so I have heard." "Are you on your way down to Gunnarsby?" asked Olaf. "No, I am bound southward," said the man. He had slept at one of the little farms yonder, where he was known. Olaf reflected that it was this Finn who had brought him the news of his grandson's birth, so to speak. He said so, and thanked him for it. He had brought with him 10 English florins, which he had had with him since his voyage to England, to make a suitable altar offering, if there should be need of such. He now took out the 2 he had left, and gave them to Finn. The man accepted them, hesitating a little. Then he stood looking at Olaf, and Olaf sat looking down at him. Neither of them spoke. At last Olaf said he must be getting on. "Maybe we are going the same way?" They were, said the man. So Olaf made Brunsveien go at a foot's pace, and Finn walked at his side, and not a sound was heard but the gurgling of the brook in its turf banks, and the horses' hoofs when they struck a stone, and the faint summery murmur in the tree-tops. And the sun beat down, gleaming upon the foliage, and both men kept silence. Once Olaf asked if the other had had the loan of a horse from Hestviken, and Finn answered no, he had preferred to walk. After a while Olaf asked whether Finn was from these parts, and Finn answered no, he came from Ness in Raumarik. With that their talk came to an end. When they had journeyed together for an hour or more, Finn said he must turn aside here. He pointed along a little path which led up a hill. So Olaf thanked him for his company, and Finn thanked him in return, and was gone into the wood. Afterwards Olaf regretted that he had not tried to find out something. But he had shrunk from cross-questioning his daughter's serving man, so he rode on at a brisker pace. Olaf had had to promise that he would look in again at Hestbake on his way home. And this time they did not let him go so soon. It was 6 years since he had last been to see his kinsfolk here, said Arn, and it will surely be 6 years before you come again, and then I shall be under the sod. Arn Thorgilsson was now over 80 winters old, but his age sat none too heavily on him. He was like his father, Thorgils Foulbeard, as he might have been had he not lost his wits. Arn was rather a small man, but handsome and well built. His hair and beard were white as bog cotton, and his florid cheeks and sea-blue eyes showed brightly in the midst of all this whiteness. Torgunn, his youngest daughter, carried on the farm together with her sons. She had been widowed many years already. Arn gave a grunt when Olaf told him that Cecilia had borne a son. "Then it will be the same as here. No one but a daughter's son to succeed you at Hestviken. To me God would not grant a son, in spite of my prayers and vows. You had one, and he has turned barefoot friar. You, Olaf, who are so rich and have always stood so well with the priests, could you not have sent to Rome and been given dispensation? Then you might have married Torgunn and carried on the Fievel race in our old home." "Could you not have thought of that before, kinsman?" said Olaf with a laugh. "Before Torgunn and I were old folk?" Olaf had to stay at Hestbake till the third day. It was near sunset when he came riding out to Hestviken. The sky was full of clouds which shone and blazed and cast red and yellow reflections on the waters of the fjord. The rays of the sinking sun shot out aslant, and the long shadows fell fitfully across the meadows, so that Olaf could not distinguish plainly who it was that came toward him through the fields. But there was something both familiar and strange in the tall, broad-shouldered figure, and the cut off his dress had a courtly air ill-suited to the place. By the man's side walked a gigantic he-goat, black as coal, with a huge pair of horns. Then Olaf saw that it was Eirik. Eirik, who came to meet him in a party-coloured jerkin, half red and half yellow, so short and tight that Olaf thought it unseemly. He had a leather belt about his waist with a long dagger, a knife, and a pouch hanging from it. The dark curly hair had not yet grown so long as to hide the tonsure. Olaf could not quite rid himself of his first impression, of something devilish in the vision that presented itself, even when he had recognized the goat as their own old he-goat. Olaf reined in his horse. Eirik ran forward the last steps, laid his hand upon his father's saddle-bow, and asked, looking up at him, "Father, is she dead?" "Cecilia? No, she is well." In silence they continued to look at one another, Eirik growing ever redder and more distressed. But there was no help for it. He had to speak out himself. "I have come home, father," he said in a tone of supplication. "As you see." "I do see." Olaf jerked at the reins, so that Eirik had to stand aside, but he walked beside his father's horse up to the houses. Olaf dismounted in the yard, replying to Tor's and Ragnar's questions concerning Cecilia. Then he turned to the house door, where Eirik stood outside, waiting. The son followed his father in. Olaf flung off his cloak, laid aside his arms. Not till then did he turn to Eirik. "Where have you come from?" "You know that well," said Eirik in a low voice. "I left home, the convent, I mean, yesterday morning. I had the loan of a boat from Galfred." "Have you lost heart for the cloistered life? Or have the friars sent you away? Have you done amiss, so that they will not have you?" asked Olaf harshly. Eirik was crimson in the face. A quiver, as of pain, passed over his features. But he answered very meekly, "The brethren thought I was not intended for the life. For you know, father, 'tis for that one has the year of probation, and my year was up 2 months ago. I was loath to part from my brethren. They let me stay a while longer. But then they told me they believed I was not meant to be a monk. I could better serve God if I lived in the world." You were to live in the world and serve God? There was icy scorn in his father's voice. Little must those brethren know you. He saw that his son shrank a little, but then Eirik answered as meekly as before. No, father, my brethren know me best of all. My father, brother Einar, and the guardian. I shall not forget what they have taught me. Don't think I am come home to take up that iniquitous life I led before. They have adopted me as their brother, as a brother ab extra. And you yourself know best that a man may live in the world and yet be mindful of his Redeemer and serve him. Olav stood looking at the young man in silence. What is this for? What garb is this? Eirik blushed again, all cramped and pinched in the ridiculous finery which was too tight and skimpy in every way. They gave it to me in the convent, he said humbly. They had received it as a gift, and they all agreed to give it to me, that I might avoid falling into debt in town for clothes to go home in. Ha ha, said Olav. Then Ragnar came in with the food, and the household followed her to take their meal. Olav talked with his folk, but said no more to Eirik, scarce looked at him. When the meal was ended, Olav had ale and mead brought in, bade his housefolk drink to the welfare of Kolbein Audunsson. Eirik accepted the horn, drank to his nephew's honour, and let it go farther. Next time it came round to him, he let it pass, and soon after he stole quietly out of doors. He must be gone to say his hours, said Ragnar with feeling. He kept his hours and wore a great rosary around his neck underneath his jerkin. It only stirred Olav to deeper scorn and anger when he heard it.